We're in another recently harvested stand now, and it's a retention harvest, so you see that there are some trees that were left from the harvest, but hopefully you can see from your angle, there's a big group of trees here that have been retained, and then you can see just a little bit of this very large opening here. So it's quite a bit different than the individual or the dispersed retention that we looked at earlier. Cheryl, can you talk a little bit more about the plan here?
Right, so this silvicultural system is just another example. The main reason that we did this here is because there's a research objective, and we're also demonstrating different silvicultural systems. Again, there's a lot of different reasons for having retention. It can be for biological diversity, which is a very good reason. Habitat, saving some of the value in the stand for another rotation. It could provide, seed or at least some partial shelter for some of the natural or planted regeneration. So there's a whole lot of potential reasons why you might do it. Downsides of it is that they're a little harder to keep intact because as well as you might choose them, if you choose a group to leave behind that has a distinct boundary around it, there's always going to be some individuals in it that are less wind-proof.
So with dispersed retention, you have more control because you're picking individual trees, whereas with group retention, you have to pick a contiguous group. So you may be forced to include some trees that may be less wind firm because you're trying to keep an intact group.
Mm-hmm. But it can certainly work. If they're chosen well, and you know that you have stable trees in a reasonably well protected site. And this is a good example of a patch that stayed fairly intact. So it's performing its function, and it's something that you see quite a bit of. Quite often, clusters or clumps of trees are being left as what would be referred to as a wildlife tree patch, for example. It may be to protect a habitat feature.
So probably more for ecological objectives than for timber management objectives?
Most often, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And as we were walking up here, we were talking a little bit about the trees that were planted here. So we previously visited a dispersed retention stand. What tree species did you plant here, and are the objectives or the site any different than the previous stand we were looking at?
Well, overall, this is a little bit higher level of retention overall compared to the dispersed retention. So we are actually leaving more here. This is more in the kind of 25 to 30% of the basal area has been retained here. And, because we have some mortality and some what you call tip-ups, or I would call wind-throw trees that tip over in this kind of a system, you might actually end up long-term with maybe about 20 to 25% of the original stand here. So it's a little bit higher level of retention, but you've still got some really big openings, some really larger disturbed areas with lots of sunshine, lots of growing space in between these groups that we've left. And in those openings, they're ample size to accommodate and regenerate a whole range of different species. So we've done a pretty diverse planting here, and again, there'll be some natural regeneration as well to something like that. So four conifer species have been planted here.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier that you, in addition to the western red cedar, Douglas fir, and western white pine, in this site you've also planted some Sitka spruce.
That's right.
What led you to plant that here, and why didn't you plant it in the other site we were looking at?
Well, Sitka spruce is interesting because there is actually a forest health issue with it in locally and through a lot of the south coast of British Columbia, and actually throughout a lot of the range of Sitka spruce. And it's a terminal weevil that will kill the growing shoot tip, and it really deform the trees and slow the growth. And so there's being some improved seed becoming available over time that's increasingly resistant, because they have found some, genetically advantaged, seed sources that they've bred. And so we're able to put it back into these openings and not have to be too concerned about the terminal weevil, killing them or preventing them from being a viable part of the future forest. And again, the Sitka spruce, it does grow here. It's part of the natural range of conifer species that we've got. There's actually one in the stand edge, just about 45 meters away from me. So it grows on a range of topographic positions and does quite well here.
Okay. For the planting here, at the dispersed retention site, we talked about some microsite differences being in depressions or in mounds,
Yeah.
but the light was pretty uniform or homogeneous through that site. Here it's going to be more heterogeneous. If we're near near one of these groups that has been retained, there's going to be more shade. Maybe maybe real close it might be a little bit cooler. There might be a little bit of influence in that. Was that taken into account when this stand was planted?
Yeah, that's right. So when we're giving the planters some details on where we want the trees planted according to microsite, they're going to focus something like western red cedar, or in some places I've used the Mablus fir in even cooler, more humid, even shadier blocks. Not right here, this isn't one of them, but in those places they are directed to plant them in the shady parts of the block, and that's what they'll do. The Sitka spruce and the western white pine and even the western red cedar, they can do well out in the open too. So there's some options that we have there. But the Douglas fir really needs a lot of light. Here on the coast, it's a pioneer and it needs to have quite a lot of light, and it's not going to do well in deep shade. So that's the main one that we ask them to avoid planting Douglas fir in very wet or very shady microsites.
Got it. So the Douglas fir you'd want to focus in further away from these retention groups, whereas the other species may do okay.
Or at least on the sunny side of them. Right?
Yeah, that
There's
makes
always
sense.
a sunny side, and that's interesting. You need to have experienced people to be paying attention. It's really tough work planting trees too. So to be able to be paying attention to those microsite variations while you're doing that incredibly challenging, difficult work takes a lot of talent and a lot of experience.
So on the south or southwest sides of these
Right.
retentions, then you maybe be more likely to plant Douglas fir, and on the
Yeah.
north or northeast, a little more likely to plant trees that are going to do better with more shade, or perhaps might benefit from slightly cooler temperatures or a little bit more protection.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.